In this tutorial, we will see how to draw precedence diagrams. Precedence diagrams have a number of uses. In these tutorials, we will be using them for assembly line balancing and for project management. A precedence diagram is a graphical method of depicting the sequences that activities must take place in. In these tutorials, those activities will either be actions on an assembly line or activities in a project. The diagram on the slide is a very simple precedence diagram. It tells us that A takes 10 units of time and B takes 5 units of time. The arrow going from A to B tells us that A must be completed before B can start. In general, precedence diagrams start on the left with the activity or activities that have no predecessors and moves to the right with the activity on the very right being the activity that must be completed last. When precedence diagrams must flow vertically, it is preferred that they flow from top to bottom. However, that is not always possible. In general, the size of the circle does not matter. In fact, it doesn't even have to be a circle. It is not uncommon to use a square instead of a circle. Additionally, the length of the arrow does not matter. An activity can have more than one predecessor. For example, you must put on your pants and socks before putting on your shoes. You can put your pants on first, or you can put your socks on first, but you need to have both of them on before putting on your shoes. That situation is illustrated by the diagram on the slide. A could be your pants, C your socks, and B your shoes. Activities can have more than one follower. For example, after putting on your shoes, you might need to grab an umbrella and grab your briefcase. Since you could grab these in either order, they would be represented by D and E on the slide. Using the data on the slide, construct a precedence diagram. I should note that I am giving the times for the activities in this tutorial, but we are not using them. I am doing that because I want you to get used to associating times with the activities. We will use those times in later tutorials. We place A to the left because it has no predecessors. Every diagram has to have at least one activity with no predecessors. Otherwise, you would not be able to start the diagram. While a diagram could have more than one activity with no predecessors, this one does not. Activity B has A as a predecessor. I have put it on top simply to maintain alphabetical order. In a more realistic problem, these activities would have names, and it would make equal sense to put C or D on top. As such, there is not one right way to draw these diagrams. C has A as a predecessor. D also has A as a predecessor. E has B as a predecessor. F has C as a predecessor. G has D as a predecessor. Note that we end up with two activities, G and H, with no followers. This is absolutely fine for a precedence diagram. We will, however, come back to this later. H is our last activity. It has both E and F as a predecessor. That completes the diagram. Using the data on the slide, construct a precedence diagram. Just for fun, we will use actual activities rather than letters. All times are in minutes. The diagram is for taking care of a small suburban lawn. Since you've seen an example already, let me suggest that you pause the video and try to work this problem on your own. Once you're done, you can use the video to check your work and spot any mistakes you might have made. The slide shows the resulting diagram. Edging and mowing have no predecessors. Raking has both edging and mowing as a predecessor. Fertilizing has raking as a predecessor. Both watering and replacing the lawn chairs have fertilizing as their predecessor. Note that this time the diagram is constructed with squares rather than circles. If you're watching this tutorial for assembly line balancing, you can stop the video now. However, if you're watching it for project management, please continue. For project management, we need to discuss two additional topics, adding dummy activities and activity on node versus activity on arrow notation. The slide shows the results of example number 2. This is a fine precedence diagram for assembly line balancing. However, we need to consider two modifications for project management. Both of these modifications are only required to make the manual calculations a little easier. Neither of them would be required if you were using software to draw the diagram and manage the project. First, it is easier to perform the calculations when there's only one starting activity. Since there are two here, a way around that is to add a dummy activity to start with 0 time. Both edging and mowing now have the dummy activity as a predecessor. That way, there's only one starting activity. Since the dummy activity takes 0 time, it does not affect the time it takes to complete the project. Likewise, the project has two ending activities. Again, the solution is a dummy activity. This dummy activity also takes 0 time. It has both watering and replacing the lawn chairs as predecessors, so there's only one ending activity. In an activity on arrow, or AOA diagram, the arrows are the activities and the nodes are just intersections. An AOA diagram of our lawn care example is shown on the slide. At one time, AOA diagrams were favored for project management, but they have since fallen out of favor. While the project planning results are the same no matter if you use activity on node or activity on arrow diagrams, AOA diagrams have a couple of disadvantages. First, Microsoft Project and most major project management software uses activity on node diagrams. Second, AOA diagrams tend to be more complex than AON diagrams for the same projects, although that was not the case in this simple example. Third, in more complex projects, AOA diagrams tend to need far more dummy activities than AON diagrams. While some project management textbooks still use AOA notation, every operations management textbook I know of uses AON notation. For that reason, we will use activity on node notation for all of our project tutorials. If this video helped you working operations management problems, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.